afternoon. My name is Rudy Mireles, and welcome to this Monday edition of Border Report Live, coming to you live from South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. Again, my name is Rudy Mireles, and I'm your host for this edition. And joining me today is Brian Svendsen. Hey, Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Rudy. How are you doing?
Good, good. Now tell us, I'm sorry about that. Let me get the right one up there for you. Brian is a journalist down here in the Rio Grande Valley, and we're going to check in with you in just a little bit because you've been covering some of the ICE raids that have been happening at local businesses across the Rio Grande Valley. So we'll get back to you in a moment, and we're going to also speak with Julian Resendez, our El Paso correspondent, in a little bit on several different topics, including the reaction to the Ovidio Guzman guilty plea that happened in the last few days. But first, let's get to some local, or a headline that's happening here, rather in California. Late last week, a federal judge ordered the Trump administration to halt indiscriminate immigration stops and arrests in Southern California. And this is a look at video from some of that. Now, the order also bars the federal government from restricting attorney access at a Los Angeles immigration detention facility. Immigrant advocacy groups filed the lawsuit last week accusing President Donald Trump's administration of targeting brown-skinned people in Southern California during its ongoing immigration crackdown. 200 immigrants suspected of being in the country illegally were arrested on 2 California cannabis farms. One farm worker died when he fell off of a greenhouse roof during the chaotic raid where protesters engaged in a tense standoff with authorities. A White House spokesman said no federal judge has the authority to dictate immigration policy. That authority rests with Congress and the president. And Brian, I want to bring you in now because these ICE raids that we've been seeing, those are we've been seeing them a lot down here in the Rio Grande Valley, specifically, construction sites, restaurants, service industry type places. But we were kind of talking with Julian a little bit before the program, and he was telling us, that's not something they're seeing out in El Paso. We talked to Salvador Rivera, our San Diego correspondent, who says they're not really seeing that in California. They're seeing more of these farms being raided. But go ahead and tell us a little bit about what you've been seeing here in South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley.
Well, first, I just want to kind of touch on that point, too, because I think it's very interesting. It's not like down here in South Texas that we aren't an agricultural area, that we don't have a lot of farm labor, that we don't have a lot of people that you might see the same sort of consistent kind of enforcement actions as they're seeing in other places. But you're right, down here in South Texas, there have been quite a few ICE raids at local restaurants. Restaurants, in fact, have been kind of hit very hard. And so, what one of the local economic development corporations has done in Harlingen, which is sort of the mid valley in the middle of the Rio Grande Valley down here. What they've done is they've partnered with a workforce Cameron to try and help some of these businesses find some people who might be able to work there. And I think we've got a clip from Orlando Campos, who's the chief executive officer of the Harlingen Economic Development Corporation.
Sorry about that, Brian. Having some technical difficulties here this afternoon. But go ahead and tell us a little bit about what the CEO of the Harlingen Economic Development Corporation would have said in that sound bite.
All right, so he basically just kind of laid it out that Harlingen Economic Development Corporation, again, that's going to be one of your cities sort of in the Mid-Valley here in South Texas, has partnered with, we're here in Cameron County, Texas, has partnered with the Workforce Solutions here in Cameron County, and also partnered with the city of Harlingen so that once a week they can hold a job fair, essentially. It's called Together at the Table, and hold a job fair, essentially, down here in Harlingen at the Harlingen Convention Center. And they invite a lot of restaurants to come out who are looking for people who are trying to round out their workforce. And when I spoke with Mr. Campos, he characterized it as unanticipated turnover in that sector. So we had to drill down a little bit and say, yes, the ICE raids have been an issue. That has been something that that restaurants have gone to them and said, we are having a problem staffing our areas. And so what the EDC has done is they actually proactively started going out and meeting with restaurant owners, just showing up and saying, hey, Can you tell us about your experiences? Can you tell us, have you been impacted by this? Is this something that you are going to need help with? And found that there was enough support within that business sector that they did decide that they were going to get a lot of hold this area where a lot of businesses can come and look for employees that might be able to fill their needs. And it's not, I just want to actually make sure to understand it's not specifically ICE raids have played a part, but this is not just for ICE raids. That the restaurant sector itself, they also, some places that have not been raided said, hey, we do need a dishwasher, we do need a busser, we do need a couple of servers. So it's not all of the ICE raids, but Campos with the Harlingen Economic Development Corporation has said that that is one of the motivating factors in why they tried to begin this initiative.
Now, you mentioned that the Cameron Workforce Solutions Group. Now, for those of you who may not know, Workforce Solutions is essentially a job center, a state-sponsored job center that they have several. Each county has, or most counties have their own Workforce Solutions organization here in the state of Texas. But it's just interesting that this is almost in a way, it's government-funded job fair in a way. Have we seen this at any other municipal level rather across the Rio Grande Valley, or is this kind of the first one you're seeing or hearing of?
You're right, Rudy. This is a change now. We see there'll be Facebook pages, there'll be other sort of messages going out on social media, the community, particularly restaurants saying, we are having a hard time getting workers. Sometimes they'll announce that they're going to have to cut back their hours, or they're going to have to shrink their menus a little bit, not offer what they usually would offer. And it is definitely interesting that this seems to have a little municipal muscle behind it, and more civically centered. And when I was speaking with some folks over at the EDC, they were themselves were not aware of any other city who had partnered with the county or anything like that to try and do what they were trying to do, and use that economic development corporation kind of those inroads and that structure and that infrastructure that they have to kind of get some of these jobs filled.
Now, as I mentioned, we're having a few technical difficulties this afternoon, but I know you did speak to some business owners about this. What did they have to say about everything that's been happening?
Well, there was one business owner that I spoke to in particular, and I thought she had a very interesting story. Now, I'll just set this up a little bit. There's a restaurant in Harlingen that called El Control. A couple weeks ago, ICE went in, they raided, they took some people out. El Control announced that they were going to have to see how they were going to, proceed. A couple of days after that raid, they came out on social media and announced they were just not going to be operating anymore. That raid essentially closed that business down. So we went to another restaurant, maybe half a block up the street, but essentially across the street from there, and the woman there told me that ICE had not been to her establishment, but following that El Control raid, the employees could look out the window and see people being a raid happening, people being arrested, people being taken away. She told me that all of her employees were in the country legally, and they either had work permits or were going through that legal process to obtain, the necessary documentation. But because of that raid, because of what they saw, they told her we are not going to come back, because they didn't feel like the agents were respecting whatever kind of paperwork they have. People were just kind of being scooped up and taken away, and they didn't feel like they didn't feel like their papers were going to protect them. Their documentation was going to protect them. And out of a sense of fear, and what she said, self-preservation, they said that they were going to wait until things had calmed down a little bit, and then they would come back. And of course, we're not to that point yet.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that the EDC said that there are businesses that weren't raided. They're going to be taking part in that job fair that they're going to be coordinating here in Cameron County in South Texas. But it's interesting because I wonder how many of those jobs, my business didn't get raided, but how many people are in that situation where my employees are just like, I'm not even going to take a chance and wait to get raided. It kind of begs that question.
I think it definitely does beg that question, especially if you are of the mindset that I have papers, I have documentation. I may not be a citizen, but I am allowed legally to work here. And if you have it in your mind that even that is not going to keep you from being taken away, even if it's just for a night, a week, however long, how long do you want to be away from your family if you feel like you have done everything that you could legally to have that job and to be here?
Now, I know you did also, when you spoke to the EDC, they did have something else to say. What was it?
Well, I think we can all agree that getting a job is a magnet for people, and so there's always this question of are these jobs that Americans don't want to do, or are these jobs that Americans don't want to do for that going rate?
Yeah, that's definitely the golden question, so, that everyone always asks.
Yeah, so that obviously, that's a big one. So the CEO, Orlando Campos of the Harlingen Economic Development Corporation down here in the South Texas, was telling me that his organization has actually had to have some conversations and really wants to be able to discuss that aspect of it with those business owners to say, listen, if you're going to hire people, it might be a good idea to offer them a little bit more, and then you don't have to go about it, in the incorrect way, I would say. And I also want to say one other thing is that one of the reasons he said that he had gotten that Cameron County workforce office involved was that so that when they go to these restaurants and when the restaurants go to this hiring event, they can make sure that they are walking people through the exact process that they do need to follow so that they are, following the law and immigration laws when they do these hires.
Yeah, and it's going back to exactly what you just said about following the immigration law when they're hiring these folks. It makes you wonder about that one business that we spoke about. You told us about rather that had workers that had papers that they were doing the right thing, both the employee and the employer, and now the employer's out of luck while the employee fears for their well-being, not knowing if they're going to be taken with or without papers. So definitely an interesting angle, and we appreciate you covering it. Thank you so much. Brian Svendsen joining us this afternoon, valleycentral.com reporter here in Harlingen, Texas. Make sure to stay with us because up next, we're going to bring in Julian Resendez to talk about that Ovidio Guzman, that's El Chapo's son, that guilty plea and the reaction happening south of the border. Stay with us. Border Report is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to Border Report Live, the Monday edition. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I'm your host, and here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. And joining me now is our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez. And Julian, one of the biggest things that happened over the last couple days was the Ovidio Guzman guilty plea. It's been a lot of news back and forth on both sides of the border. Tell us a little bit about, catch us up.
Yes, Rudy. Again, we have an incredible story coming out of Mexico, out of the Mexican border. What happened is that after Ovidio Guzman entered his guilty plea, there was a lot of reaction on both sides of the border. South of the border, the president of Mexico kind of questioned the process, kind of questioned why the U.S. Always says that it does not negotiate with terrorists. Yet here's this man, Ovidio Guzman, who is part of an organization that has been labeled by the U.S. as a foreign terrorist organization, getting a plea bargain. So that elicited some reaction. Now, what happened in the U.S. is that the lawyer for Ovidio reacted to that response. He kind of questioned the Mexican authorities, or the Mexican government, to meddle or to question the processes in the U.S. Pretty much, his comments were to the effect that, hey, there's also dirty laundry down there. He mentioned the case of the Mexico's former defense minister, who, after he left office, he was indicted in the United States on drug charges, and how the Mexican government, Sheinbaum's, the current president's predecessor, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, kind of went and rescued him from the U.S., promised the U.S. he will get a fair trial in Mexico. And as soon as the general was back in Mexico, he ended up being free. So that in turn elicited even more of a reaction from Mexico. And it got to the point that this New York-based lawyer that's representing Ovidio right there on the screen, as well as his brother, kind of say, well, the president of Mexico is acting more like the public relations arm of the cartel than a lawful leader who wants to really get rid of a problem. As a result, I can report to you that today, at her daily news conference in Mexico City, which is broadcast on social media, Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, said that the lawyer was going to be sued by her administration on slander, on grounds of slander. Now, in Mexico, the slander used to be a crime, like a criminal offense. So whenever somebody says, "I'm going to sue you for slander," people's reaction is like one of concern. However, the law has changed in recent years with the opposition party members being elected to office, and now it's just like in the United States, a civil matter. Still, we have this ongoing feud between Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, a country of 129 million people, and this high-profile lawyer who, in addition to representing Ovidio, has represented Ovidio's father, El Chapo Guzman, as well as John Gotti Jr.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring up that, that fear that people had about a president suing. It's not something you typically hear about here. Being a public figure, the president or any member of Congress, political, everything from, your mayor all the way up to the president, kind of fair game. Is that kind of typical on the other side of the border?
Yeah, like I said, whenever somebody sues you for slander, there's still the stigma of, oh, I could go to jail. Something really bad could happen to me. But pretty much this verbal feud between the two parties escalated after the lawyer posted a comment on social media to the effect that Ms. Scheinbaum was acting pretty much as a PR for one of the sides of the cartel, of the Sinaloa cartel, the one that his client allegedly does not represent, but rather the opposition, the rivals of his client.
Oh, that's very interesting stuff, and thank you for breaking that and bringing that to us here on Border Report right away, Julian. But if I could ask you to stay with us, because when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about another issue that's happening south of the border, and that is, well, it was supposed to restart today. The U.S. government said no on livestock being imported from Mexico. Julian, you've got the latest on that, and we'll be right back on Border Report in about a minute. And welcome back to this Monday edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host from here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. And joining me now is our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez. Now, just to catch people up, Julian, for those of folks who weren't watching last week, Sandra Sanchez was on here, and we were talking a little bit about the Mexican screwworm, which is essentially a parasite that infects livestock of all kinds. At the time, there had been a suspension on cattle imports coming in from south of the border in Mexico. But recently, there's new reporting showing that, one, that was supposed to pick up today, and it's not starting back up today. But because there may be an instance of that screwworm found just a little bit closer to the border here. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, this is another topic that has pitted the government of Mexico against the government of the U.S. The threat of the screwworm is real. It is a parasite that infects livestock, and the last thing the U.S. wants is to have infected cattle come into the country. So they worked up a plan with the Mexican government to stop the movement, the arrival of this screwworm, and it involves quarantining cattle in southern Mexico. Now, last week, both governments agreed, okay, it's under control, and cattle imports may resume because the stoppage of cattle crossing the border represents millions and millions of dollars in losses primarily for Mexican growers, but also for the American companies that purchase the livestock. So for a whole 2 days, cattle were able to cross from Sonora, Mexico to Douglas, Arizona, and then the U.S. government, the Department of Agriculture, put a stop to that. They said, whoa, we found one case of a screwworm in Veracruz, Mexico, which is far south from the border. So they immediately stopped the imports. I was in Columbus, New Mexico a few days ago, where right there on your screen, that's Columbus, where the cattle imports from Mexico were supposed to resume today. Nothing happened because the quarantine remains in place. Mexican officials today were expressed nervousness about when this was going to be lifted, and they also said, "Okay, sure, stop it, but let's solve the problem." So the two countries are working together to release, and this is kind of interesting, to release hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of barren flies, because the screwworm comes from fly larvae. So they've been growing, the two countries have been growing in labs or genetically altering flies. So when they release them in Mexico, they mate with flies that potentially can carry the larva and not produce any offsprings. So that's how they're trying to control this latest emergency. However, people south of the border are growing nervous. They're trying to show the U.S. government that they've done everything possible. And again, the president of Mexico, not very happy. Last week, she said, as far as I know, it's one case, and you're stopping this because of one case. So there's a lot of tension, and the cattle are still not crossing.
Yeah, and it's kind of concerning. I mean, for cattle ranchers too, we can talk about the price, and of course, it's going to affect us all. The price of beef could go up as a result of this, extension on the ban. I was kind of looking up some figures beforehand, and according to the USDA, the U.S. cattle population is actually at a 73-year low, which means this extended suspension could, raise the prices at your local H-E-B, Walmart, your local family-owned grocery stores across the country. But that's got to also be concerning for cattle ranchers, right? To the thought that even just one fly being, I think you said 370 miles or so away from the border, that could be a problem for them with that, the herd at an all-time low as well.
Yeah, what I'm hearing on both sides is that this stoppage is affecting the economies on both sides of the border on different levels. Obviously, the bigger impact is on the Mexican growers. But yeah, I mean, it impacts all of us here in the U.S. When the beef supply is low, when the future beef supply through imports is also low. So what people on both sides of the border connected to this industry are doing is, first of all, making sure, okay, what are we doing to solve the problem? Once they have that information, they're contacting their lawmakers, they're contacting the federal government to say, okay, when can we resume this? Because it's affecting all of us. And the point of the Mexican government is, okay, we're doing everything you tell us, so let's get it going. Let's get it back online.
One interesting thing that we see here, and we've actually seen, the federal government prosecute people for this, is importing beef, just in their cars, crossing the border, whether it be the Gateway International Bridge in downtown Brownsville or, a commercial bridge, people just kind of packing their coolers full of meat and bringing it over. Is that a concern? Maybe someone bringing over some kind of meat? Can that happen? Can meat be tainted? Do you know that?
Well, that has always been a problem, and way before the screwworm. There's very strict regulations on what kind of meat you can bring across the border. But as far as reaching an industrial type level, I don't think with today's technology that's going to happen. But it's always a concern for people to observe the law and not contribute to the problem.
And Julian, one last question. Has there been any kind of, sign as to how long this extension will be? Will it be, has there been anything from the government on what to expect going forward?
Unfortunately, no. I've been monitoring both governments pretty closely, and the Trump administration seems to be pretty tight-lipped about this. They're pretty much are telling Mexico it'll be done when it's done. As far as Mexico, I've gotten several clues, some of them not too accurate from the Mexican government. What I do know is that they have what they call working groups, representatives from Mexico and the U.S. meeting on a regular basis to address issues ranging from public safety, the cartels, to tariffs, and now also to this screwworm crisis. So to answer your question, no, there's no definitive word. Everybody is hoping that whenever the quarantine that they set up in the state of Veracruz is over and their tests show that there's no new contagion, then the imports will resume.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Julian, for your reporting on this and the reaction to that Ovidio Guzman guilty plea with that breaking news as well today about the president of Mexico actually suing one of the attorneys for Guzman and El Chapo's family members. We appreciate you being here. Julian Resendez, our El Paso correspondent. Thank you so much to those of you at home watching Border Report today. We appreciate your time. As always, we are live every Monday through Friday at 2:30, and you can get every episode of Border Report live along with all the great reporting from Julian in El Paso, Salvador in San Diego, and Sandra Sanchez from right here in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas on borderreport.com. My name is Rudy Mireles. Until tomorrow, have a great day.